In this video, I'm going to demonstrate DeployExpert. I'm going to walk through the product and take a look at how it works, how basic process flow works, and how it can really bring value to your organization and automate a lot of the common driver management tasks within an SCCM environment. So the first concept with DeployExpert, really everything starts with this profile manager here. And when we create a profile, what we're saying is, here's the target operating system that I wish to manage. In other words, this is the target OS that I want to deploy to and harvest drivers from. And so I've created a number of different profiles, and each one sort of represents, a major operating system: XP 32-bit, Windows 7 32-bit, Windows 7 64-bit, and Server 2008 R2, which is 64-bit. And each of these profiles has been sort of limited to or pointed at a collection within SCCM. And this says to the DeployExpert analyzer, only consider systems from this collection when you're performing analytics. And so this kind of represents what I would call the day-to-day, driver management and deployment tasks that you'd find in any given organization. So this Windows XP profile is pointed at my Windows XP collection, of which there's 4 systems. And so here in the analyzer dashboard, if I select that profile, I see that analytics has gone ahead and it's discovered 4 systems in total and created 3 different model groupings and 3 different compatibility classes. Now, the concept of compatibility class means this compatibility class will contain systems that have the exact same devices. So you may find within any given model that you'll have a number of different compatibility classes, and that's going to represent the variance within a model in your environment. And that's a really powerful piece of DeployExpert, and why it brings value is you're not just managing to model now. You might have 100 Latitude E6500s in your environment, let's say. But of those 100, there may be a wide variance of devices actually in those systems. And that might be because users have installed devices. It might be because you got a different shipment and that just contained different devices from the manufacturer. It may be for any number of reasons. But simply going out and downloading the Latitude drivers from the Dell site and importing those into SCCM and organizing them and creating driver packages and then associating those driver packages within your task sequence to the model called Latitude E6500 doesn't guarantee that when you push an image out to any one of those systems that it's actually going to have all the drivers that it requires. Well, with DeployExpert, it gives you visibility into your environment and shows you exactly how much variance you have within these models, and then lets you do something very, very powerful, and that is choose a candidate from any of these classes or all of them, one candidate, and harvest the drivers off of that candidate. So no more going to the manufacturer's website, downloading drivers, getting a whole bunch of EXEs that you have to extract, and then get rid of all the junk and the extra installers and figure out where the raw driver files are and import those into SCCM, and then somehow make SCCM aware that when you're deploying the operating system to this model, these are the drivers you want. You don't have to do any of that. You just have to say add selected or add all, which will just choose one from every class and add it over here, and then you just configure a harvest job. So for what I would call sort of day-to-day operational, tasks like reimaging systems, you would create these profiles. You'd point them at a collection that contains the operating system that you want to manage. You'd make sure that you've got your classes sorted and organized and harvested from, and that will ensure that when you reimage this WinXP Pro x86 system, for instance, DeployExpert will ship all of the correct drivers to that system, because they've been previously harvested and associated back to this compatibility class. Now, we can see that in action when we go down here to the driver management node. So if I click on that class, we see here's what we call the master driver library. So every driver that's been harvested so far by DeployExpert shows up over here. And then each class will have different associated drivers picked from this master driver library. So this Lenovo here has all of these drivers and devices that have been harvested from and that have been associated to this class. And so when I push out my XP task sequence to a Lenovo that fits in this class, it's going to actually give all of these drivers to that system at deployment time, and it dynamically figures that out. Now, let's say we had a number of compatibility classes within this Lenovo model grouping, and then I unbox a brand new system and I just want to do a bare metal deployment. At that point, we'll ship it a broad spectrum model-based driver pack, and the way we do it is we just get an aggregate of all of the compatibility classes within a given model, and we ship all of those drivers down to that system. And in that way, you can have bare metal deployments supported out of the box without any effort on your part. You don't have to pre-import the system and associate it with a class. You don't have to tell SCCM or DeployExpert anything about that system, because the model will show up in the task sequence as a pre-configured task sequence variable, and when the task sequence steps run that run the DeployExpert analytics and figure out what model is running, it will say, hey, do I know anything about this? If yes, and it's a member of an existing compatibility class, great, give it those exact drivers that it needs. If no, at least I know the model, and then I can give it all of the drivers that have been harvested for that model, and that'll ensure that you still have successful deployments even to bare metal systems that have never been in SCCM. So that's a really cool feature. So as we're talking about, I guess what I'd call day-to-day operations, deploying existing OS to existing systems, this helps tremendously. It takes all of the manual effort out of the equation and all of the guesswork out of the equation, and it just does all the work for you. Now, when we're talking about OS migration, here's where DeployExpert can really add some unique value. So I'm going to create a new profile, and I'm going to say Windows 7 x86 migration. And in this case, I'm actually going to point it at all systems. And I'm going to say create, and then I'm going to change the target OS to Windows 7, because that's the target OS that I'm wishing to deploy at this point. And I'm going to save that change. And now let's go back to our analyzer dashboard, and let's actually run analytics. What this is going to do is just go and scrape the SCCM database and analyze all of those systems in there and start organizing them into compatibility classes, which are defined as systems that contain the exact same devices. So now we see we've got a whole bunch more models and compatibility classes showing up, because it's gone and analyzed every system in our environment. And for these, you see it's basically one-offs because my lab is fairly limited. But with virtual machine, there's a number of systems that have been associated back to this compatibility class. And then we've got what would look like kind of one-offs here. So the idea is the systems that are blue are systems that match the target OS of this profile. So this is a Windows 7 x86 system, and therefore it is a acceptable candidate for driver harvesting. Now, why is this important? Well, let's say there's this Windows XP Pro x86, and this model and this compatibility class is a system that I want to deploy Windows 7 to at some point. And I want to make sure that before I do, I've got all the drivers and everything sorted out so that when I deploy Windows 7 to this system, it's going to get the proper drivers and all the devices are going to install. So first thing I'd like to do is actually make sure that this system becomes a member of this compatibility class. And the way I can do that is actually by using this Compare Classes button. So I'll go in here and I'll go choose this class and compare it to this class. So it's going to show us some different things. The main thing here is that this device has been detected as different. So I can go back to the profile and I can go on an individual device level and actually filter those out just by checking that box. And now I'm going to say to analytics, you know what, ignore these devices when you're performing your analytics and considering which systems are going to make up which classes. So if I save that and come back here and rerun the analyzer, now we'll see that those XP systems that previously were in their own unique compatibility class have just been added to this compatibility class, because we've told DX, look, I don't care about that difference, just ignore it. And now I could say, all right, I'm going to add this system as a candidate for harvesting, and I'm going to harvest drivers right off of this. And this wizard actually creates an SCCM advertisement. It creates a collection. It puts that candidate computer in the collection, and then it advertises a harvest job to that collection. And then I can track the status here while it's waiting to harvest. So now, when that harvest job is finished and the drivers have been imported by DX, integrated into this profile, now when I deploy Windows 7 to this XP system or this XP system or any of the systems in this compatibility class, they will get the drivers that were harvested off of this candidate computer. So now I know exactly whether my deployments will be successful or not based on knowing that I have successfully harvested and integrated drivers into my SCCM environment and my OS deployment task sequences. So that's a really, really powerful capability that DeployExpert puts into your hands. Now here's another case where it's very, very valuable. Let's say you get a brand new system that's never been in your environment. Now typically you're going to spend a whole lot of time going out and downloading the drivers from the manufacturer's website, trying to organize them into folders. First of all, trying to figure out, depending on what manufacturer it is, trying to figure out if you've got the right drivers, trying to extract the drivers from the EXEs that they send or that you download, trying to clean up the bloat, trying to make sure that when you import them, if you're going to import them right into the SCCM driver repository, that you account for duplicates if that's going to happen, and then creating multiple driver packages under here that you will then at some point associate with your task sequences with that model. Or depending on your approach, you might take the sort of total chaos approach and just import all your drivers into the driver repository and then use a single auto-apply driver step in SCCM. Now, you'll notice I have drivers in here. I didn't manually import any of these drivers. These all came in via the DeployExpert technology. So any drivers that are harvested by DeployExpert get imported into the SCCM driver library, and then they get added to one master driver package. That's it. And then mass storage drivers are handled within their own separate driver packages. And those ones will show up here, and these are all the mass storage drivers that have been harvested by DeployExpert. So now I've got a brand new system. Previously I'd have to go out and do all this manual effort. With DeployExpert, I just put an SCCM client on that system, I check it in, I run analytics, and it'll show up as a new compatibility class within whatever profile I happen to be managing at that time. It'll show up as a new class. I can harvest drivers from that, and then from that point forward, that class will be green. It'll show as green, and it will be harvested and ready to go. Any subsequent systems that come into my environment will be deploy ready. And so that eliminates a lot of the manual effort, and more importantly, it eliminates the guesswork and any of the sort of necessary regression testing. Because let's say you were back here using the sort of driver repository method by just importing drivers into here and then letting the auto-apply driver step choose from this list which drivers it's going to deploy to your systems. The problem with that is any new driver that you import may impact other drivers, and that might cause unpredictable results for other systems in your environment, because they might end up choosing that driver rather than the one you really want them to use. So the way that DeployExpert works is by making discrete associations between the drivers that were harvested off of your candidate system and all of the other members of that compatibility class. So you know with absolute certainty the exact drivers that are going down to those systems. So once we've got drivers harvested, I'll just give you a quick look at the sort of analytics, what this means. This class is red, and that means it's not deployment ready. That's because this Hyper-V host that I'm harvesting from is actually turned off. So it's just still sitting in this harvesting state because that job hasn't completed. The ones that are green are deployment ready. That means they're integrated. That means drivers have been harvested and imported into SCCM and associated with this compatibility class. And then the model groups that are orange mean that some classes within that model group are ready, but others aren't. And so this gives you a real easy, high level, and quick way to see what the state of any given profile is and how deployment ready those profiles happen to be. The last thing I'll show you is how DeployExpert manages your existing SCCM MDT integrated task sequences in order to make sure that those drivers get down to the systems at deployment time. So if I go back to my XP profile, you'll see that I've actually added a task sequence to this profile. And I've integrated that task sequence into this profile. And when I do that, it actually puts it here in this node. And it adds a section of driver management steps that really run all of the logic of DeployExpert in order to make sure that the drivers get injected exactly as you want them to be injected. And with XP, one of the biggest headaches for administrators are these mass storage drivers, because if those aren't present, the system will blue screen, and you have really no options at that point other than somehow managing to get that mass storage driver either baked into your image or injected at deployment time. Well, every time DeployExpert detects a mass storage driver, it imports it into this package, and then it adds it to your task sequence. So this is the ICH7M controller. This is the ICH7-9 controller, which represent two different models in my environment. This Lenovo, if we scroll down, we see it's got that mass storage driver, and then the Latitude, which has this mass storage controller. So those have been harvested, and those have actually been created as drivers, imported into SCCM, added to this driver package, and added to this task sequence as driver injection steps. And this step will only run if a quick WMI query detects that that exact device is present. And if it's not, it'll skip that step. And then here we see that it's looking for a different device. So now we've got predictability and automation around the mass storage pieces with Windows XP, which solves a lot of headaches and problems that were previously present in the old deployment ways, where you either had to bake them into your image or you had to sort of manually go and get the mass storage drivers from Intel or from the vendor, import them, figure out how to associate them properly to that within that model or whatever. This takes everything, all of that effort out of the equation and just does it for you. And so you'll have systems booting up and no more blue screens while you're using DeployExpert, and that's a really, really big advantage. And it's just a really nice feature, because personally as an administrator of SCCM, I've fought with that so many times and had a lot of frustration around that. So that is a great feature. The other really cool thing about DeployExpert is that it only keeps one copy of every driver that it detects and imports into SCCM. So we've got single instance driver storage, and that really cuts down on the storage requirements. Now let's look at the old way of doing things. Depending on your approach, let's say you were using the approach where you don't actually import the drivers here, because if you try to import duplicates into the SCCM driver repository, it doesn't let you, unless you do some workaround hacks. So for that reason, and for other reasons like we discussed before, where auto apply really isn't predictable, it just chooses a driver for you, and you may not want the driver that it chose for you. For that reason, a lot of people tend to create multiple driver packages. Now, creating multiple driver packages is going to create duplication of those driver files in your environment. And depending on how rigorous you are in cleaning up the drivers that you've downloaded from the vendor, that could result in gigabytes and gigabytes of driver files sitting on your SCCM distribution points. DeployExpert makes sure that it only pulls in one copy of every driver. And if a new class is harvested, and while it's processing the harvested drivers, it detects, hey, I've already imported this exact driver, it won't import it again. But what it will do is just associate it with the master driver library here. And so what we're doing is we're managing associations between classes and drivers, and we're ensuring that the exact devices that were detected and harvested on any given class are associated back to that class, and that we ensure we have single instance storage. So I hope you've been able to see that DeployExpert really brings a lot of value around what has traditionally been a very manual and labor intensive and frustrating and sometimes unpredictable process within SCCM. It brings clarity to your environment. It lets you see under the hood and figure out exactly what state you're in. It lets you see all of the variants out there in your estate. It lets you automatically harvest the drivers from all of those systems and associate them back. It updates your task sequences for you to make sure that they are new driver packages, but only keeps one copy of every driver in that master package. And furthermore, it manages your mass storage devices within the Windows XP task sequence, which takes another big headache out of the equation for you. So I hope you've been able to see that DeployExpert is really valuable and provides a great way to manage drivers within SCCM. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.